All right, so we're looking at chapter 3 today. Oh my gosh, my forearms. The physiology of weight control. So we're gonna talk a lot about energy balances today. We're gonna do some math. We're gonna look at some numbers and kind of get to understand those and shake it all down, right? So objectives today: understand the physiologic components of losing weight and gaining weight, understand how certain laws of science have a direct correlation with our weight control. We're basically going to talk about thermodynamics today, communicate our information about like weight gain, weight loss, and obviously weight maintenance as well. So again, we kind of come back to this idea of what we said yesterday that doesn't always feel very true. Like where it's like, look, it's about a calorie surplus or a calorie deficit. Like I've had clients be like, that cannot be true because I have done the calorie surplus thing, I've done the calorie deficit thing, right? And they're like, and I didn't get results, and I promise you I didn't cheat on the program. Well, that is, generally true, but not always true. So we're going to try and kind of explain how that sort of works today. So we do know that if there's a calorie surplus or an energy surplus, that will, result in weight gain. We call that a positive energy balance, which is a much more, effective way to kind of describe like how we gain fat. Consuming more energy than that you are expending, right? Then we have a negative energy balance, which is consuming less energy than you are expending. So again, if we sort of look at this idea at its most basic, right? If we really kind of zoom out, like, and let's look at the idea of like somebody who's trying to lose, let's say like 50 pounds. You know, they need an energy deficit of some type. They're either going to get that deficit by exercising more or get that deficit by eating less, right? But either way, let's say it's 50,000, right? So they want, I'm sorry, it's 50 pounds, right? So 50 pounds lost is the goal, right? Well, we know exactly how many calories are in 50 pounds of fat, right? There's 3,500 calories in a pound of fat times 50, right? So they need 175,000 calorie deficit. So 175,000, just to make sure that this is a little bit more clear, calorie deficit is needed, right? Now, that could be somebody who maintains their current lifestyle. They don't change a thing about their diet, right? But then they end up walking, let's say, to burn 250 calories a day, right? So let's say they don't change their diet at all. Okay. They don't make any changes to their diet. But what they do is they start walking and they start burning an extra 250 calories per day. Great. Cool. That's just, maybe getting up in the morning, going for a 30-minute walk or so, right? Really kind of aggressively pushing their pace, getting a little bit out of breath, right? So 250 calories a day. So at 250 calories a day, right, in order to get 175,000 calories burned, that is going to take 700 days, right? So in scenario one, let's say they, increase their walking, and they burn an extra 250 calories. They eat the same meals every single day, right? So that's going to take them basically 2 years to get that 50 pounds up. Honestly, it's actually not a terrible, rate, really. I mean, like, if that's something that takes that long, I mean, it's certainly possible to do it faster, we know that, right? We can math that out. But I mean, honestly, like if they're like, look, I cannot commit to changing my diet, really, I can't make major lifestyle changes, I'm just going to go for a walk every day, right? Or maybe here's the thing, right? Maybe this is somebody who like gets a new job, and so they just end up burning an extra no matter what, as long as there's like an extra 250 going out every day, it'll take them about 700 days, which we do know is kind of a slow pace, right? That's not necessarily as fast as maybe somebody else would want to do it. So then if we look at like making another adjustment, right? So we make another adjustment where it's like, well, what if you also just took just simply 250 calories out of your diet every day, right? That is making a couple like dietary changes, right? If we switched from, let's say this person has like a cup of whole milk every morning in their like morning Cheerios, right? Now, obviously, I would also suggest to maybe get a healthier cereal than just Cheerios. But let's just say, like, again, this person doesn't want to make major changes, right? So they switch and they switch from like whole milk to fat-free milk. Let's just take a look at the difference there, right? So whole milk versus fat-free milk, right? Protein content's going to basically be the same. Sugar content's going to be basically the same. The difference is they're going to lose 8 grams of fat every single time. So the calories from 8 grams of fat, we know that's 8 times 9 because there's 9 calories in a gram of fat. It's about 72 calories. I guess in this version, maybe things are slightly different, but you can see it's going to go from 150 calories down to 80. So they're saving 70 calories there, right? It's not bad. They're on their way to that number 250. So we make another couple changes here and there, right? And eventually we just, with very small changes, get them to lose another 250 calories from like diet. So if they just decided to diet alone, it would take them 700 days, right? 175,000 calorie deficit needed, 250 a day. It'll take you 7 days. You put that diet plus that increased bit of physical activity together and create a 500 calorie deficit per day. And suddenly this number 700 is cut in half. And now it's going to only take you 350 days. So just barely under a year, we could be 50 pounds down. 250-pound person could be down to 200 pounds. Now, that is how this works in a perfect scenario. Unfortunately, energy balance doesn't quite work that way. And this is what makes this kind of stuff here, because I'm mathing this all out right now. This is what makes this stuff kind of feel untrue. So what makes it feel very untrue is the fact that like somebody starts doing this and like, yeah, maybe they're losing a pound a week, a pound a week, a pound a week, 3/4 of a pound per week, 3/4 of a pound per week. Now suddenly their timeline's screwed up. 1/4 of a pound a week. Why is that happening? Well, as their body loses weight, there is less cells to run. You know, even if they are fat cells, which are not very metabolically active, but they are still somewhat metabolically active. So as they start to lose body fat, they have less body to run. Less body to run results in less energy passively burned per day, which means that their calories start to balance out. And now once they start to balance out, people are like, they hit a plateau and they get really frustrated, right? So that's going to kind of set the stage for really what we're going to kind of look at today with this idea of energy. It kind of explains, you know, this idea that like it doesn't feel like it's true when I keep saying that it's all math, you know. I promise you that it is true, but I get that it does not. It's like you can maybe believe it here. It's like, yeah, I get it. I see the numbers. I believe it here. But like it's just sometimes hard to believe in here, you know? And I totally get that. I've explained it to my clients a lot. The other thing is like people also like we watched in the Jeremy Ethier video in our last course, it's really easy to stop moving as often. So people will actually sort of like slow down in their life, right? That slowing down also results in, you know, people struggling to maintain that calorie deficit, right? So they start exercising 250 calories a day in the morning, but then they end up sitting more or they're a little bit more sedentary. They bounce their leg a little bit less without noticing it because that's the stuff you don't pay attention to. And all of a sudden they are burning, you know, they're back into balance. Your body will do as many things as it can to balance you out, guys. It really does not want to, you know, lose weight. It also doesn't necessarily want to gain weight. But gaining weight is at least biologically advantageous to the body. At least it thinks so. It was an advantageous thing when we were cave people. Like it was good to have stored energy because you never knew where you were going to find your next meal from. But that's not necessarily the case anymore. So kind of coming back down to this idea, we're talking about calories here. Energy balance is a measurement of calories. It's the amount of heat energy required to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water 1 degree Celsius. So I know I've showed you guys this this video before, but like I can never spell that correctly. Calorimeter. Not even close. Yeah, what's the good one? There's a crash course video, but he goes so much more in depth to it. It's actually terrible. That is a crash course video I purposefully do not show. I think it might be this one. I don't remember somebody wearing a freaking elf hat. Let's find out. Let's take a gamble here. See, Adam, I Googled every table and showed you guys it, and now I've got their ads again. They are relentless with their marketing. All right, here we go.
Here is a Christmas dinner. Turkey, potatoes, gravy, delicious.
I don't think I showed this in class.
But what these scientists want to know is not how it tastes, but how many calories it contains. This is Dr. Sue Roberts. Her research often involves measuring the calories in food. This is the science of a calorimeter. Firstly, you take this lovely meal and homogenize it.
Then over the course of 3 days, we slowly remove all the moisture from it in a freeze dryer, like astronaut food.
These dried samples are made into pellets. This is a bomb calorimeter.
It has a chamber into which exactly measured portions of the freeze-dried Christmas dinner is placed. The lid is sealed and electricity is fed through the food inside to explode the food and capture the heat that it produces.
Here's what's happening on the inside. Unlike in the air, in a bomb calorimeter, none of that energy escapes. It all goes into heating the water surrounding the central chamber.
So when you burn the food, it releases heat, and 1 calorie is the amount of energy that heats 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree centigrade.
When Sue and her team crunched the numbers, it turned out the full plate we saw at the beginning contained 1,208 calories.
So, kind of cool, right? Basically, what they do is they break all the food down into a way that'll be very easy to basically light it on fire, and that releases all of the energy from the food until eventually you're left with nothing but like burnt carbon atoms, which, by the way, when you burn your food and you have those like crusty bits that are just like they taste like nothing, or it tastes like tree bark, like that's just pure carbon. Doesn't have any calories anymore. It's all by itself. So basically, they are lighting the food on fire, and then you saw that it was surrounded by water. When that fire's energy like moves outward, it gets transferred to the water, and the temperature of the water goes up. So for every degree of temperature that the water goes up, that's a calorie, right? If there's a kilogram of water in there, which I think that's how much they use. So a calorie is the amount of heat energy required to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water 1 degree. So in the example that they had there, that food had 1,200 calories in it. Chances are they were only using like a 1 gram serving of that food, right? Rather than using like multiple. And then they noticed that it went up by probably 120. No, that would be way beyond boiling. Probably never mind. They probably used 10 grams of food. And they probably took it up by like 12 degrees, and then because that's like going up with like that much kilograms of water, it came out to 1,200 calories, right? So that's how we measure it, right? Like, if you were to take that pellet and eat that, right, that was obviously a small portion of what was on the plate entirely. You would get a certain number of calories from it. If you took the whole plate, freeze dried the whole thing, and you're just left with like nothing but like those pellets, it would still have the same number of calories in it supplied to your body, which is why like freeze dried food does still have calories. It seems like it has way less calories, like when you look at freeze dried food. Like I use freeze dried berries and stuff in like my cereals and all that. Like it seems like it's really low calories because like it looks very large, but like it's the same number that you would find in like a typical portion of that food. It just has all the water removed from it. So that's kind of what a calorie is, right? So when we look at this idea of like energy balance, right? We are looking at like how much energy it takes to kind of run our bodies versus how much energy we're putting into our bodies, right? Now, ideally, like you think about your car, right? You put 5 gallons of gas in your car and it's going to be able to travel the same distance on average every single time because it takes a certain amount of energy
Ok, ok, nomás quiero saber porque está el...
I'm just gonna mute him. To run your car. So it takes a certain amount of energy to run your car the same distance every time you put 5 gallons worth of gas in it. So you think about like gasoline, it's not gonna have calories for us because we can't like process gasoline. But it has the same amount of like calories in it for the sake of argument as every single time. All gasoline is basically the same way that all carbohydrates, all proteins, and all fats are basically the same, right? It's all about the energy trapped within this food, right? And so like that's what we're doing. Is we are consuming food and then we're releasing the energy from it. And the energy unit that we use to kind of talk about is calories. So one of the things that we got to understand about like metabolism is we have to kind of like step away from metabolism and look at like just the general rules of like the universe that we live in, right? So the first rule, if you ever study physics, is called it's the first law of thermodynamics, right? And this is they also call this the law of the conservation of energy. And it basically says that energy in any isolated system remains constant and cannot be recreated, although it may change forms. So, for instance, like the energy that was in that food that they put into the calorimeter, when they put it in there, they released the energy from that food and it changed form from being like food into heat energy, right? It changed, but it's still the same amount. And then that heat energy was transferred to the water, and that's why the temperature in the water went up. That's how they're able to measure it, right? And what's funny is like the minute they open that up, that energy is going to get released into the atmosphere and it's still around, right? So all of the calories that you're consuming, every calorie you've ever consumed in your entire life is actually like heat energy that was transferred from the sun, right? Like all of that energy kind of came down, and plants have a really cool ability to be able to kind of take that energy, take those photons from the sunlight and turn it into what we consider to be food. And then animals eat plants, right? And then animals can also eat animals. And that's, another way that we are still in the end eating the same energy that came from the plants, which is the same energy that came from the sunlight. Like that's what's kind of crazy, right? Oh, shoot. Oh, there we go. Never mind. Sorry, Alan. I hit the ask to unmute button. I missed you. So we're seeing like energy changing form all the time. So yesterday we watched a really cool video showing actually how this all works, right? Like, where does the energy go? Like in the video, he's kind of talking a lot about how he's like, he asked all those people on the beach, he's like, where do the calories go? Or where's the fat go? He said. And they're like, gets burnt up as energy. And he was like, no, that's not right. Here's the thing, it is still partially right. Like, he actually meant like, where do the remaining pieces of fat go? And so like that's not necessarily the same as talking about the energy, but the energy trap between fat molecules or carbohydrates or proteins, right? It's all released and it powers our body. That's our ATP. And yes, we have to get rid of any byproducts that are left over. That's how we exhale the carbon that's left over from our carbohydrates, fats, or proteins, right? Because carbon's at the center of all those things. So energy can change form. In the video we watched, it changed into that weird, white powder that you saw inside the balloon. And it turned into like the ability to move around, that heat energy, which we're then transferring to the atmosphere and stuff. And, eventually can actually go back into plants. We're exhaling carbon dioxide, that also goes back into plants, right? So it's, as much as like we are eating plants and they're feeding us, we're also feeding plants a lot of times, right? And there's this big balance in the ecosystem, right? So energy in any isolated system has to remain constant. So once a calorie enters your body, any calorie, right? Protein, fat, or carb, I don't care what it is, it's just energy. Once it gets into your body, it can't be created again. We can't just make energy out of nowhere, nor can we destroy it. Once it's in there, it's in there. Now, you can get it to change shape. You can get it to change shape by turning into an ATP molecule and some carbon dioxide and a little bit of extra water. The carbon dioxide you can exhale, and the water you can sweat out or pee out or whatever, right? A lot of ways to get rid of water. So that's what happens. So now, like that calories worth of energy, that carbohydrate became ATP, which we burnt up and used up. It became carbon dioxide, which we exhale, and it became water, which we can sweat out, right? So we changed its shape, but we never got rid of it, right? I mean, that's not 100% true. We get rid of it once it's changed shape and we exhale it and pee it out and stuff. Like, that is getting rid of it, right? But what happens if we don't actually get rid of it is really what I want to say. Like, so what happens if we consume more calories and we don't convert it into ATP? What if we consume more calories than we're actually expending, and we don't end up converting those calories? What ends up happening, let's say our glycogen stores are full, our blood sugar levels are normal or are high even, and we don't need any energy today. We've burned 2,000 calories, and we've consumed 2,000 calories, but then right before we go to bed, and that's going to burn a little bit more calories, but let's for the sake of my argument, let's just say like it's a kind of a beginning and an ending situation. And then there's just like an extra bagel or something that we consume, right? How many calories is a bagel? Like 200? 200, right? 245. So 245 calories go in. Now, like I said, we already burned all of our energy for the day, so we don't have anything to do with that 245 calories. So our body breaks down the bagel enters our bloodstream, and now it's part of us. Now it's in an isolated system. It cannot be recreated nor destroyed, but it can change shape. So bagels are mostly carbohydrates. So those carbohydrates get broken into glucose in the digestive system, enter our bloodstream, and now there's 245 calories worth of food in our bloodstream. Our body's like, great, use it to produce energy. And it's like, no, we're asleep right now. We don't need any energy. It's like, oh, all right, turn it into glycogen, put it in the glycogen stores. And I was like, nah, glycogen stores are full. We don't have anywhere to put it. And I was like, all right, well, put it in long-term storage then. So instead, it takes the glucose and it converts it into fat molecules, into triglycerides, and it stores it in an adipocyte. Remember, adipocytes are your fat cells, right? Adipocytes are fat cells. They're basically like kind of a big cell with this big empty sac surrounding it, with this big hole in the middle, and that stores triglycerides. So the larger they get, the more triglycerides they have stored in them, until they get big enough, and then they're like, all right, we can't get any bigger, and then it divides, and now you have two fat cells. So that's where the 245 calories worth of energy went. We turned it into a piece of a saturated fat molecule, 245 calories worth of saturated fat molecules, right? So that's going to be divided by 9, about 27 grams worth of saturated fat that we just stored, which is about how much you would want to consume in a day. Now here's the thing, like, the next day, if this person burned an extra 245 calories, well, sure enough, like their body's gonna be like, all right, well, where am I gonna get the energy from? Now, probably gonna get it from glycogen, because you have certainly more than 245 calories worth of glycogen stored on your body at any given time, which means that you don't actually end up getting that bagel out of the fat cells. But maybe if you were like, maybe if through the normal day you actually do work pretty hard, and you do burn through your glycogen stores, yeah, your body's going to have to tap into long-term storage to come back to those calories. So it might actually tap in and pull those 245 calories out of the fat cell. But hopefully this is, that's the example of like the balance that I'm talking about here. So when you consume extra calories, those extra calories get stored. Either they stay in the blood sugar like very temporarily, which is not really even storage, they just kind of become energy, or they get stored as glycogen, and that's short-term storage, or they get turned into fat, which is long-term storage. Now the thing is, when your body goes to pull pull energy out, it prefers to use glycogen. Your body always wants to get from glycogen first and fat second, right? So if you put something in long-term storage, it's much more difficult for it to get out, which, is why, because then what'll happen is like, your body doesn't want to get into that, right? It wants to mostly stay in short-term storage. So let's say the next day you end up like you want to get rid of that bagel, right? And so you go and do some exercise and stuff, right? You exercise again, your body doesn't choose to go to the bagel that it went to yesterday, where it stored yesterday. It goes to your glycogen stores. And so your glycogen gets a little bit low. Now, there are internal processes in the body that when your glycogen stores start to empty out, your body gets hunger cravings. So now you're likely to make a decision in your life, which is to eat something that's high in calories, high in sugar, because your body is sort of signaling, hey, let's tap off these let's cap off these glycogen stores. Let's get these filled back up. Right? So then you might not notice that you go consume an extra number of calories, even if you did try to burn that energy off from yesterday. And again, that is one of the reasons why this does not feel very true when we're describing it to our clients. I'm sure everybody in here has dieted or exercised to reach certain goals and results, and maybe the numbers just didn't match up with what you were expecting. You were like, I ran my numbers. I was supposed to get this many pounds lost. I was supposed to get this. I was supposed to get, and it just didn't happen. And like sometimes it's due to falling off the wagon, or sometimes it's due to you slowing down. It's your body being like, maybe we just burn less energy, right? Or maybe it's due to, all of these little tiny things that you just don't happen to notice throughout the day. And that's why I promise this math stuff is exactly how calories work. And it's the rest of your career is going to be spent trying to convince people of that who are positive that it's like, no, it's magic. It's got to be hormones. It's got to be this. It could be hormones. Hormones also slow your calories down, Sure, it could be a little bit like hormonal, hormones, it can slow your metabolic rate. And so you end up burning passively less calories. But people will be looking for answers, they'll be like, no, it's because I wasn't on a keto diet. No, it's because I didn't do a juice cleanse. And they won't accept that it's the math. So just to show you a real life example of this, right? If an individual gets a new job and they no longer take the stairs at work every day, their job is just a little bit less active than it used to be. So they begin burning 50 less calories per day than they did originally. 50 calories a day. They're only going to work 5 days a week. That's 250 calories per week. Now, there's 3,500 calories in a pound of fat. So it may take as little as just over 3 months to gain that 1 pound of fat. And here's the proof in that. 3,500 calories divided by 250 means it'll take them about 14 weeks to gain that 100 pound, that 1 pound of fat, right? Because again, 50 calories a day, 5 days a week, that's 250 a day, or I'm sorry, 250 a week, right? 3,500 divided by 250, it's 14. So 14 weeks later, this person gained 1 pound, right? 52 weeks in a year. That could be about 3.5, 4 pounds a year. Now here's the thing. That won't always stay true for this person because eventually their body will, end up in what we call homeostasis. Homeostasis is balance, right? So what'll end up happening is like, let's take a look at like the BMR here, right? Let's go to a BMR calculator and show this in real time. So we're gonna take a look at somebody over the course of this 14 weeks, right? So this is we'll say a 25-year-old male, 5'10", 160 pounds, new job. So they end up consuming that extra, or I'm sorry, they end up like losing that extra 250 calories a week, right? So their BMR, and we're going to say they're sedentary. So they're burning 2,060 calories a day, right? 2,060 calories a day. But their sedentary job is slightly, less sedentary than this. So in reality, that's actually 210 calories per day. So 14 weeks later, they're going to gain 1 pound of fat, right? So now they weigh 161 pounds, right? So not that big a deal, but watch this. 2060 is going to change to 2066, right? So now it's no longer a 50 calorie deficit per day. Their new job it's, again, they're not losing 50 calories a day anymore. Now they're losing, that was 6 extra calories. So 50 minus 6, it's actually 44 calories a day. So 3,500, or I'm sorry, 44 times 5 days per week. That's now a 220 calorie surplus per week, right? So 3,500 divided by, what did I say? Gosh darn it. 44 times 5. 220. 3,500 divided by 220. It's going to be 15.9. Oh, 15.9 weeks. So 16 weeks later, we'll say, they gain a 2nd pound. So 16 weeks later, they gain a 2nd pound. So now they're at 162. We hit calculate. Now they're at 2,071 calories. So that deficit's even smaller. So you can actually see the weight gain went from 1 pound in 14 weeks to 1 pound in 16 weeks. This time it'll go a little bit even higher. It'll take even longer. So 20 or what was my original number? 2060. So now it's 11. So 15 minus 11 times 5, 195. So now they're burning, they're getting a little bit of balance back, right? So that's only a 195 calorie difference now. So 3,500. It'll take them 18 weeks. So about every 2 weeks, they get a little bit, they're gaining 1 pound every 16. I'm sorry, 14 weeks, every 16 more weeks, 18 more weeks beyond that. Now, eventually, their body's going to get heavy enough. They're going to have enough mass to go from 2060, if I can get this number, to 2110. So let's say 167, I'll bet. Nope, a little higher. 170, 169. So there we go, 2109. Once they get to a body weight of 169 pounds, 9 pounds up from where they were, then they'll be back to balance and their body will maintain homeostasis and they'll stop gaining weight. And that's how like your body mass, that's how your BMR kind of affects things, right? Now, this is a really extreme example. This would probably take, this 9 pounds. I mean, that took so many weeks. This is probably going to take at least a year and a half. It was only a 50 calorie difference per day in our scenario, right? But you can see like how that weight gain happens very slowly over the course of a lifetime. And then, 2 years later, this person realizes, oh my gosh, I'm 20 pounds heavier than I used to be, right? And maybe that bumps them over the line from being, in a healthy BMR to being overweight, right? So that's the homeostasis that we're talking about. And there's the kind of math of it, right? So again, energy in an isolated system will always remain constant, right? If energy in is equal to energy out, we call that weight maintenance. Energy in is greater than energy out, that results in weight gain. Energy in is less than energy out, that results in weight loss, right? So in the human body, we can convert energy into mechanical work, or we can convert it into glycogen, or we can convert it into triglycerides, which we store in our adipose or fat tissue, right? So the regulation of all of this is under a lot of different pathways. There's a lot of stuff going on. Honestly, the reality of what would happen with this person who suddenly stopped taking the stairs at work because there are no stairs at their work and like their job is just ever so slightly less sedentary, they'd probably start bouncing their leg or something throughout the day until they make up those missing calories. They might, have the instinct to get up and move around a little bit more. Something might happen that will hopefully get them to kind of balance things out. But you can see like how that doesn't always happen. I mean, some people are not just, some people are wired a little bit differently to be less active and less bouncy. Does that make sense so far, guys? Are we seeing how like these examples are easy? I know it's a lot of numbers, and I move kind of quick.
Yes, it is
Good.
a lot of numbers, but yeah,
Okay.
I get it. You know what? I just want to like say that, before I even like started this, I kind of checked out a book in the library of physics. And it's so crazy now that you're like bringing up all this physics and how the energy and all that, because it kind of explained that in the book, and like now that you're putting it into play, I'm like, oh, thank God I read this book.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
That's what calories are. It's all thermodynamics at the end of the day. So again, we kind of come back to our lesson that we had the other night when we were in person, right? Where we calculated out our energy. So our individual energy needs are going to come from a couple different places, right? Let me just clear this here. So we've got our total daily energy needs, right? Which we call our total daily energy expenditure. Because we call it expenditure because it's like, well, that's, you need to eat your expenditure, no more, no less, that does mean that your needs can be different than that. Like if your need is to lose weight, then your total daily energy needs are lower than your total daily energy expenditure. But the assumption in this like labeling that NASM's going with here, the assumption is that you're just at maintenance. So total daily energy expenditure, your TDEE, is going to be your total number of calories that you burn in a day, right? Now that is going to be made up of, you guys will remember this is going to be made up of your resting metabolic rate, right? That's the estimated amount of calories an individual burns at rest, right? That's also sometimes called your BMR. Okay, so sometimes we'll also refer to that as the basal metabolic rate. Then we've got the other part that makes up our total daily energy expenditure. We've got our thermic effect of food, the estimated amount of energy from processing and digesting food, right? So that's a really big one. Now, we do know that protein burns more calories. It actually takes more energy to process protein than it does fat or carbohydrates. So upping the protein in your diet is actually one of our methods for increasing the number of calories burned per day. So you can actually burn maybe 50 extra calories by switching to less processed, higher protein foods. And then we also have the thermic effects of activity, okay, or physical activity, if you want to call it that. And that is going to be the estimated amount of calories from being, all of the daily physical activities. So somebody who exercises regularly obviously is going to have a higher thermic effect of physical activity than somebody who is sedentary, right? So these are the three things that make up our total daily energy expenditure, right? You put these three things together, you get your total calories. So now you can see three ways for us to increase our caloric expenditure, right? One way is to be more physically active, right? If I'm more physically active, I burn more calories, right? Another way is to also eat high energy food. Now, I will say that has been abused in the past. You guys might have heard of things like the grapefruit diet, or like oh god, there's some other ones out there. But there's certain foods, they call them negative calorie foods. Those are often just very low calorie diets in disguise. They're not healthy. They're not good for you. However, yes, protein burns a little bit more. High fiber foods burns more calories. Your body just has to work harder to process things like protein and things like fiber. Highly processed and high fat foods are typically lower in terms of the thermic effect of food. So you're not going to get a huge caloric expenditure boost by changing your diet, but you can get some, but probably the best one, in my opinion, is this one right here, your resting metabolic rate. This is the estimated calories that you burn at rest. The more calories you can burn at rest, the better. So this is actually why we want to get to a place where we do burn lots and lots and lots of energy while resting. The more muscle mass you have, we know muscle is much more metabolically active than a lot of our other tissues. Your nervous system is actually probably the most active. But your muscle mass burns a ton of calories. So the more muscle mass you have, the easier it's going to be to maintain a good total daily energy expenditure. It's one of the reasons why we want to encourage our clients to put on as much muscle mass as possible, because that's actually going to make it easier for them to meet their daily energy needs. And I can show you that actually very easily just by going over here. Let's go back to that BMR calculator. And instead of using the Harris-Benedict equation, which only needs age, sex, height, and weight, we're going to use the Katch-McCardle formula. This one's going to use body fat percentage. So let's say I've got a 200-pound client, right? 25 years old, 5'10", right? That right there at 20% body fat means they've got a BMR of 1938. Let's take their body fat percentage to 25%. That's going to put their BMR at 1840. So 20, 1938. 25, 1840. Those are some pretty big differences. Now, they get like shredded at 200 pounds. I mean shredded, I say. But like they get down to like 15% body fat, this is going to jump really high, all the way up to 2036. So we can even math that out as well. Let's get a little bit more specific about this, right? Let's say we got a 200-pound person, right? And they have 25% body fat, right? That's actually pretty easy to calculate out here, right? So we got a 200-pound person. Actually, let's do this. 200 pounds, 25% body fat. Let's do 20% body fat, and we'll do 15% body fat, right? So same person, three very different scenarios. Now, in this version here, this person has we can figure that out. So 25% of the tissue of their body is fat, and the remaining is their lean body mass. So that is going to be 200 times 0.25. That's 50 pounds fat mass and 150 pounds lean body mass. We'll say lean mass. Okay. In this scenario here, that is 200 times 0.2. That's 40 pounds fat mass and 160 pounds lean body mass, right? And in scenario 3, I did not give myself enough room. I used too big a text, as I always do. That's 200 times 0.15, 30 pounds of fat mass, which means 170 pounds of lean mass, right? That's a pretty darn lean individual there. Moving all of this over so I can make some friggin' space. People are calling me even though they know I am unavailable. If there's anybody who shouldn't be calling me, it's people who should know the Sochi stuff. All right. Sorry. I'm being catty. So look at these different scenarios here. These basal metabolic rates are going to be very different each time, right? They are going to actually consume more calories naturally. It's going to be easier for them to actually maintain their body fat, right? And let's take a look at what those numbers actually turn out to be. So we got 200 at 25%. That's a BMR of 1840. Okay, in this scenario here. In this one, we're going to make that 20%. Their BMR is 1938. And over here, their BMR equals 2036. So this is another thing, right? So now we can see also like the benefit to using something like the Ketch-McArdle equation. It's nice because it does take into account an individual's like lean mass. You know what I mean? Like that is just a little bit more data. So like you got a client who's like, yeah, I've been on this diet before. I calculated all my numbers and, you know, I wasn't able to lose weight, right? Like it didn't work for me. The last trainer I had ran all my numbers and it didn't work. Maybe they were honestly just using the wrong formula. Because like if I took 3 200-pound people, one of them at a body fat here, here, and here, right? If I've got 3 different individuals, those are 3 very different caloric needs, right? I mean, that's a difference of 1840 to 2036. That's a difference of 200 calories a day, right? Just burned passively. And then that gets multiplied by even more the more active they are. So, you know, that's a pretty substantial difference, right? All by gaining 20 pounds of muscle, right? So again, that's why we like putting on muscle mass. That's why it should be a large part of the equation here, right? So your basal metabolic rate is about 60 to 75% of your total energy output. Really good way to develop a negative energy balance and lose weight is to find ways to increase that basal metabolic rate. Thermic effective food. Thermic effective physical activity. The more activity you engage in, the higher your thermic effect. And certain diets do burn more energy. High fiber, high protein diets have been shown to have a higher thermic effect. So, you know, these pie charts, this pie chart here can fluctuate massively, you know. And then here are the different formulas here. The Owens formula, by the way, Owens formula, by the way, also uses lean mass. Actually, not in this version. I think that's supposed to be lean mass. Harris Benedict, Mifflin, St. George. There's different formulas out there. And then we have like activity factors that we multiply things by, right? Once you have your basal needs, you need to multiply it by an activity factor, just like we did the other day when we were practicing, right? So once you have your estimated general caloric expenditure, then we need to look at your caloric needs, right? So let's say 1 pound of fat is equivalent to 3,500 calories, right? Generally, when it comes to like losing weight, guys, you want to aim for anywhere from 1/2 to 2 pounds per week, right? 2 pounds being pretty aggressive. That's 1,000 calorie deficit per day. Really, we want to aim anywhere from 250 calories to 1,000 calories deficit per day. So 3,500 divided by 7, that's 500 calories a day. That's a pound a week, right? So let's say our client Samantha here. She burns an average of 2,300 calories per day based on her current daily lifestyle. Now she wants to lose 10 pounds and she's giving herself a 3-month goal in order to do that. Okay, so I can actually, again, figure that out. That's 10 pounds times 3,500 calories. She has a 35,000 calorie deficit goal. And she's got 3 months to do it. So that's not too hard to figure out either. That's 90 days. So she needs a 388 calorie deficit per day. So me as her trainer, I'm going to say, all right, well, let's try to increase your caloric expenditure, right? Let's say she's been exercising already, but now I'm going to say, okay, well, that's great. I want you to also try doing, in addition to what you've been doing, we can either make your workouts a little harder and get you to burn extra calories during those workouts. But since that's already part of your lifestyle, what I can do is say, why don't you also just go for a 1-hour walk per day at the end of your day, right? Or, something like that, right? Something that's going to get her, to burn an extra 250 calories every single day. Now, if she does that, she increases her expenditure. By the way, we can go back to, so let's make an actual Samantha here. Let's say how much weight did she want to lose? 10 pounds. So let's say Samantha is 31 years old. She's 5'8", and she weighs, we'll say 160 pounds, right? So her goal is to get down to like 150, right? And currently she's exercising 1 to 3 days per week. So I could say like, all right, well, we want to see an extra 250 calories burned every single day. So if that's her normal lifestyle, she's eating, we'd put her on a 2,048 calorie diet in order to stay the same, right? And then what I could say is like, all right, well, let's go ahead and up your physical activity a little bit and get an extra 250 calories every single day. So if we get her doing a little bit more intense exercise, right? Maybe something like exercising, let's say 6 days per week, and it's 5 days per week, but it's all like pretty intense. It's like HIIT training, right? That's going to take her caloric expenditure up to 2,308, right? That's an increase of, I think, pretty darn close to 250 actually. 260 actually. So she gets a 260 calorie increase per day. So she was like generally doing a little bit of like yoga 3 days a week. Now it's like, all right, well, we're going to hit the weights, then we're going to follow that with like 30 minutes of like HIIT cardio afterwards, right? And there we go. Now she's burning an extra 250 calories beyond what she was burning before. That times 7 days a week is 1,750 extra calories. Now, we're also going to decrease and put her on a slight caloric deficit compared to what she used to be on of 200 extra calories. So we're going to take her normal diet and we're going to subtract 200 calories from it, right? Again, maybe she switches to whole milk or to fat-free milk, right? That was 80 calories right there. She makes a couple other small little tiny changes and suddenly we're at 200 calories. So that's going to be a 400 calorie difference. So, nope, sorry, I was looking at the wrong number. That's a 200 calorie difference per day. So now 250 from the exercise, 200 from the food, that's 450 total calories. And that's every day. So 450 times 7 days a week, that's 3,150 calories that we are creating a negative deficit of every single day, and per week, right? So that's not necessarily a full pound lost every week, but she doesn't need to lose a pound a week. She's trying to do this in 3 months, right? So a deficit of 3,150 per week should result in a weight loss of about 10.8 pounds in the next 12 weeks. How do we know that? There's 3,500 calories in a pound of fat, 3,150 per week for 12 weeks, 37,800 calories. Now, again, as she starts getting closer to her goal, like when she loses 5 pounds, like she's halfway there, we should probably reassess and if we need to make adjustments. But in my example here, we gave her like 90 days to do this. She actually needed 388 calories, and we ended up burning an extra we actually ended up overshooting it by 50, 60, 70, basically 62 extra. We're getting a lot of like, she's burning actually beyond what she needed to. So she'll actually probably come in a little under her goal a little early, and that'll kind of make up for that. But that is, sort of the math there. Now, again, I don't see myself as a very great math teacher. I tend to move a little bit quickly. So if that got confusing, I've got a video that is a very good example of showing some of this math. Let's see here what I want. Calorie deficit. Okay, so this is a sort of a body recomposition video. This is also going to add some like strength training tips in there, which is really nice. But basically, this is how to build muscle and lose fat at the same time. Now, here's the thing that is somewhat controversial. You will hear a lot of trainers say, hey, you can't build muscle and lose fat simultaneously. That's not strictly true. You're going to see some of the math here. It is more true the longer you've been training. Unfortunately, your body kind of gets used to the stimulus of exercise. So, good Lord, why is that lagging? Your body sort of gets used to the stimulus of exercise, so then it becomes harder to gain muscle and lose fat simultaneously, which is why most bodybuilders will do cutting and bulking phases. But it's still a really good example. So we're going to watch this one, and then I've got another video to show you guys from him as well. So can you build muscle and lose fat? We call that body recomposition.
Can you build muscle and lose fat at the same time? A lot of people on the internet think the answer is simple. You can't. If you want to build muscle, you need to do a proper bulk, and if you want to lose fat, you need to do a proper cut. I think this idea has made its way into the mainstream from old bodybuilding lore, where it was thought that you had to be in a massive caloric surplus to build size and then trim down for competition. But recent scientific evidence has challenged this idea. For example, this 2013 study from Garth and colleagues found that even when they overfed subjects by 600 extra calories per day, they actually didn't gain significantly more muscle, but did gain over 3 times the fat mass. So nearly all the extra bulk came as fat. Now, I should say I don't actually have anything against cutting and bulking. In the right circumstances, I think it makes perfect sense. And many of you guys know, last year I ran a pretty hefty bulk myself that I called bear mode. And I still think that if you want to gain as much muscle and strength as possible, as fast as possible, then being in a bigger caloric surplus is the way to go. However, this quicker muscle gain will come at the expense of more fat gain as well. And many people simply don't want that, but just accept it as an inevitability. But it doesn't have to be that way. In fact, it's perfectly possible to build muscle without a large surplus or even without any surplus at all, because fat tissue and muscle tissue are separate systems. And I've broken down the math explaining why this is possible in another video that I'll link below. Now, many people will get on board with this and say, okay, building muscle while losing fat is possible, but not really practical because it only applies in a handful of more limited and obscure scenarios. But I think these scenarios aren't as limited as they seem, and I would say body recomposition is a realistic goal not only for some people, but nearly all people. So let's quickly cover the situations where I think recomposition makes the most sense. First of all, new lifters. Newbies can build muscle and lose fat at the same time quite easily because as a new lifter, you're the most primed for muscle growth you'll ever be. This means that calories can be pulled from stored body fat to fuel the muscle building process with just basic progressive resistance training and a reasonable diet. Second, because overweight individuals have very large energy reserves stored in body fat, they can eat in a caloric deficit and still have plenty of stored energy to fuel the muscle building process. Thirdly, detrained individuals who got jacked before but then stopped training due to injury or other commitments are in a similar camp to the new trainee, where, owing to the very powerful muscle memory effect, they're able to rebuild a lot of muscle very quickly, making recomposition common. And finally, using anabolic steroids allows most people to build a lot of muscle very quickly, allowing the body to tap into fat stores to fuel muscle building. But at this point, I would say even if recomposition were limited to these 4 groups, walk into any commercial gym and most people will fall into one of these 4 categories. For example, even if you've been in the gym for several years, you might still fall under the newbie category if you haven't been training nearly hard enough or smart enough over the years. I'd also add a 5th category to this list, the sub-optimized trainee. This would include anyone who's been going to the gym for a while, may even count themselves as an intermediate or advanced level lifter by training age, but deep down hasn't really been putting in their best effort with their training or nutrition. And according to my good friend and co-author Chris Barakat, he sees recomposition in his lab all the time, even in more advanced trainees.
So I literally see this every single semester. Every training study we've ever ran, I've seen body recomposition occur. Once we really start paying attention to some of the details to a higher extent, like nutrient timing, and really optimizing their macronutrient intakes, we can see recomposition with some of the best athletes ever. This one subject in particular, he gained 20 pounds of lean mass in 10 weeks, and he actually lost like a pound of fat mass at the same time. So he was a basketball player, pretty well trained when it comes to resistance training. He was able to squat 1.75 times his body weight, so he fit the criteria for the study, and he just blew up. He basically came in the lab looking like a normal basketball player, and then he looked like Phil Heath playing basketball.
So I think there's really only a tiny subset of the population that recomposition wouldn't be practical for, truly advanced trainees already with perfectly optimized training and nutrition who are near their genetic ceiling for muscle growth. But in my opinion, this is the obscure scenario, and it only occupies a tiny sliver of the total population looking to improve their physique. Okay, so body recomposition is not only common, but practical. Now, how do we do it? Let's break it down into 5 simple steps. First, you need to recognize that training is the driving force of body recomposition in any scenario. You can have the most optimal diet in the world, eat over 9,000 grams of protein per day, and you still won't build much new muscle without a progressive training stimulus. In the book, we use the analogy of a car, where we can think of our training as the engine and our nutrition as the gasoline to fuel performance. The better the fuel, the better the performance. However, without the engine, the car simply won't move regardless of the fuel's quality. We can also think of sleep and stress management as the oil changes and tire rotations required to keep things moving. So when it comes to training, you want to focus on progressive overload, applying effort, and using proper technique. And once you have the fundamentals in place, fine-tune your volume to fit your advancement level. Generally speaking, 10 to 20 sets per body part per week is a good ballpark for most people and most muscles. Next, you need to decide on a primary goal. Even though you may want to do both at the same time, it's important to establish which is more important to you. For example, if you're currently on the leaner side, let's say 8 to 12% body fat as a male or 18 to 22% as a female, then your primary goal should probably be to build muscle. And if you're not so lean, so somewhere between 15 to 20+% as a guy or 25 to 30+% as a girl, then maybe your primary goal should be to lose fat. Once you've decided on your primary goal, next you want to center your caloric intake around maintenance calories, the number of calories you need to eat to maintain your weight. If your primary goal is to build muscle, you should enter a slight caloric surplus, adding 5 to 25% to your maintenance intake. If you're leaner, less advanced, and more genetically gifted for building muscle, you can get away with a bigger surplus. If your primary goal is to lose fat, you should enter a slight caloric deficit, slashing 10 to 20% off your maintenance intake. The more fat you have to lose, the bigger the deficit should be. And in the book, we outline other considerations, such as if you're detrained, highly advanced, skinny fat, or significantly overweight. Next, you need to set up your macronutrient targets, starting with protein, the most important macro for recomposition. In the book, we recommend a sliding model for protein intake based on lean body mass, where the leaner you are, the closer you should be to 1.6 grams per pound of lean body mass, And the more body fat you have, the closer you should be to 1.2 grams per pound lean body mass. Using myself as an example, I currently weigh 100.
Again, has a lot of protein. This guy goes nuts on the protein, which if you consider the fact that it has like a higher thermic effect, you can kind of see the motivation behind that, but it is a lot.
165 pounds at about 10% body fat. Using our sliding model, since I'm quite lean, I should be more toward the high end of intake. I'll pick 1.5. Multiplying it out, that would give me a daily protein intake of 222.8 grams per day, so I can round that up to 225, which is what I'm eating at the moment. Now in my last full day of eating video, I explained the benefits of going higher on protein than might be required just to build muscle, so even though you could probably get away with less, I think eating a higher intake is both safe and advised for those looking for recomp. From here, you want to determine your fat and carb intake. Personally, I set my fat intake at a minimum of 20% of caloric intake and then fill in the rest with carbs. Okay, the fifth and final step to achieving body recomposition is to pay attention to the details. Like I mentioned earlier, this step might not be required for beginners. They can get recomp by just following the first 4 steps, but as you get more advanced, recomp gets more difficult, so it's more important to optimize your approach. We spend a lot of time in the book laying out these optimization strategies. I'm going to focus on a few of them here. The first is to sleep more. I think sleep might be the single most underrated factor when it comes to transforming your physique. Just consider this 2018 study from Wang and colleagues. They split 36 subjects up into 2 groups that both entered a caloric deficit, except one group slept 1 hour less 5 nights per week. They were also allowed to sleep 1 hour extra on the weekends to catch up. As it turns out, after 8 weeks of dieting, weight loss was the same in both groups, but the group that slept well lost 83% of their weight from fat, whereas the sleep-restricted group lost 85% of their weight as lean mass. That is crazy. Now, it's worth mentioning that these subjects weren't weight training, so lifting probably would have flattened out the results a bit, but I don't think it would have been enough to offset that enormous difference that sleep made. The next area we can look to optimize our approach is through peri-workout nutrition, or the timing of nutrients around the workout. Now, I already discussed some of the misconceptions around this topic in my latest full day of eating video, so I'll just link that video down below. We can also turn to supplements to optimize, but it's worth noting that there aren't any recomp supplements that just cause recomposition on their own. However, there are a few worth mentioning that can help. In the book, we organize our supplements list into tiers. At the top of the list in tier 1, we have protein powder, creatine, and caffeine. Protein powder is especially important for vegan lifters, and I recommend so-called vegan whey, a blend of rice and pea protein that offers a full spectrum of amino acids and has a high leucine content. Whey protein can be used at any time of day to help make meeting total daily protein goals easier, and consuming a casein source before bed might have merit as well. Creatine is by far the most well-studied supplement on the market, and given how cheap it is and how low its risk of side effects are, it's a pretty obvious choice to supplement 3 to 5 grams of creatine monohydrate per day. And I'll link my creatine science explained video down below if you'd like more info on that. Caffeine rounds out tier 1 of our supplements shortlist for increasing strength, prolonging time to fatigue, increasing acute fat oxidation, and more. However, unlike creatine, caffeine is susceptible to tolerance, so it might be smart to reserve it for your heaviest or most demanding training sessions, or periodically cycle off it to resensitize yourself to the effects. And of course, we dive into many other optimization strategies across the 15 chapters in the new nutrition guide, including sample meal plans, pre and post workout meal examples, more supplements, cardio strategies, and a lot more. So if you guys are looking to take your nutrition up a notch, you can save 25% off the ultimate guide to body recomposition at the first link in the description box below for the launch, or you can head over to jeffnippard.com, go to the nutrition plans tab, and you can find it over there. And after launch week, so next weekend, it'll be going up to full price. So the manual has over 140 scientific references, an exact step-by-step guide for setting up your calories and macros, a list of foods to focus on, and even a full chapter on training for recomp. It also include customer service, so if you guys have any issues, there's a support email that you guys can contact. So hit up the link over here next to my head.
So that is his approach. I think it's actually, I do not disagree with a lot of, I think the protein's pretty aggressive, personally. And again, like, obviously he's not taking the time to like talk about, like, if you have a history of high blood pressure or a history of kidney problems, like, you know, yeah, be careful with that protein intake. He's just assuming like normal, healthy person, baseline statistics, and he goes much heavier into it. But Freddie, that is kind of an answer to your question you were asking the other day. If I had like let's say a 300-pound client, you know, with like you know, they have 50% body fat. We'll go real high, right? Just because that'll make my math easy. They have a 150-pound lean mass. That's what you multiply by your protein factor. And he takes it as high as, instead of doing like grams per pound, he does grams per pound of lean body mass. So, you know, he had it as high as like 150 times 2. That would still be 300 grams of protein for that person. But if you took it as low as like 1.2, you know, 150 pounds lean mass, 180 grams of protein, that's actually pretty good, you know? So that's his take on it, which I like. I actually think that's not a terrible scale. I just think it's a little aggressive. I think like I would just move to the right on that scale much more slowly than he does. So, so hopefully that kind of helps with, you guys can see, like, if your goal is to kind of try to maintain, not lose too much muscle mass or gain muscle mass while you're working on like fat loss, that's not a bad plan, right? It's going to come from training. You want, you know, your classic like strength training, 10 to 20 sets per week, relatively high intensity as possible, pushing yourself consistently, and then focusing on a, you know, somewhat not too aggressive caloric deficit, right? And that gentle caloric deficit with just a little bit of extra protein in there will help you maintain that lean mass. Okay, so let's estimate. Let's talk about some of the hard parts of this whole weight loss process, right? Let's talk about like some of the drama surrounding this, because like sometimes people are going to have a hard time you know, meeting their goals, and they're going to get frustrated, right? How do we explain like why someone isn't necessarily losing the weight they're supposed to, or gaining the weight that they're supposed to? You know, well, one of the things is that you'll hear of is called the set point theory. The set point theory is basically saying that your body has internal biochemical processes and regulatory control systems that will slow down in order to resist deviations from your current weight. Basically, what this is saying is that your body will resist recomposition changes by decreasing your metabolism or your calories burned through day. Now, I don't necessarily love this concept. It's where you'll hear people say like, well, I ruined my metabolism, right? By going on a diet. I don't necessarily agree with that. Your metabolism bounces back pretty well. There are extreme cases, like in cases of like disordered eating, like anorexia and bulimia, where like metabolic changes can persist for years at a time. Basically, your body will find a way to slow everything down. And if it can slow your metabolism down, you know, that's going to mean that it's easier to kind of balance things out. So I have seen cases like that. I will say that is somewhat a thing, right? However, I think it is a lot less coming from your metabolism changing, as much as your body will try to get you to sort of naturally change your habits. So like your body will resist you know, composition changes, because maybe part of it is just energy gap, right? As you lose weight, guys, we just saw, like in the example I pulled up earlier, somebody lost weight consistently, and what that resulted in was the fact that like their metabolism did slow down. Their metabolism rate didn't slow down. There's just less stuff to run, so their overall caloric expenditure was less. Generally, it's about 8 calories per pound. So like every time you lose a pound, you're also going to burn 8 less calories per day. Not a lot, doesn't seem crazy, but it does add up over a long time, you know. Somebody who lost 50 pounds, that's 400 calories a day, right? So like that is a substantial difference in the long run. So somebody who loses weight and then continues eating the same that they used to, even though their body is burning less energy, that can explain the set point, right? Where the body's like, oh, I'm just destined to be this, right? This is one of the reasons why I don't like it. I get a good note here. I don't like the set point theory because I also think it's a poor explanation of how metabolism works, but I also don't like it because it does sort of foster a fatalism where it's like, this is my weight, I'm stuck this way, there's no way I can change. You know what I mean? Don't love that mentality. There's also the NEAT approach. Remember NEAT, that non-exercise activity thermogenesis that we talked about, right? It describes how your calories are burned from like normal living, bouncing your leg, fidgeting. Individuals on diets actually will often decrease NEAT without realizing it. You'll just be a little more run down, a little more sedentary, and so you'll burn less energies. And so it will result in a weight loss plateau because your body's like, all right, I balanced this out. We don't walk around anymore. We just tend to sit on the couch all day, but at least our calories are balanced out. You know what I mean? Like that's sometimes what happens with NEAT. Now there are the more dangerous versions where you will sometimes hear of like what we call hyperplastic obesity. And this is where you have to remember the way fat cells function, right? If you look at an adipocyte, it's this big fat reserve. Now, your adipocyte does the same thing whenever it's a cell, right? It does the same thing any other cell does. It divides if it needs to. So if this fat reserve gets full and it divides, now you have two fat cells. Two fat cells means you've got more space to fill that out. So you have an increased production of fat cells, and your body doesn't just get rid of cells unless you actually actively destruct those fat cells, which is where you hear about things like cryolipolysis, for instance. This is where someone will actually use, like, have you guys seen like the cool sculpting stuff or cryo T-shock, right? Where they'll use machines like this that will actually drop the temperature down low enough that your fat cells actually does destroy their cell walls. And then your fat cells are destroyed. And so your body will actually like clean those out. But that's the only way that, or like liposuction, you know? But that's the only way that you're actually going to like straight up destruct fat, you know? So that is hyperplastic obesity. And then metabolic efficiency, you know, as you see like a decrease in metabolism, your body is starved, so then it sort of dials back how quickly your metabolism runs. Again, this is the one that I don't really like. I think that shows a pretty poor understanding of how metabolism operates. There's a lot of disagreement on that. Not everybody thinks we do. I mean, it makes sense when you say it, where it's like, yeah, you're on a diet, so your body slowed the metabolism down so that it can balance things out. But there's no actual scientific evidence of that happening. And so it's just one of those things where I'm like, it's sensible and it's a story that makes sense, but it just in practical, like when we look at it, we just haven't seen it. So I personally don't really believe in that one, unless it's like somebody with like disordered eating, which case absolutely. All right, so one more video and then we'll wrap things up today because we're at the very end here. Really cool one by Jeff Nippert here. This is going to be another little bit of math here. But he's going to talk about, this is very cool. This is like the opposite of what we think of with weight loss. But can you build muscle in a calorie deficit, or can you lose fat in a calorie surplus? It's a very weird question because those things are opposites of each other. So this is very
Giving your body what it needs to thrive doesn't have to be complicated. AG1 replaces all of these key health.
For sponsoring this video, Skillshare is an honor. So before we get into answering the question of whether it's possible to build muscle in a caloric deficit or lose body fat in a caloric surplus, first I want to just pose the question to you guys. So let's just imagine a scenario where you have a pretty well-trained lifter who's never done any direct forearm training. He usually maintains his weight on around 2,500 calories but he's currently running a 12-week cut where he'll be dieting on 2,000 calories, so about a 20% caloric deficit. And he'll obviously be losing body mass over the next 12 weeks. So the question I'm posing to you guys is, if he starts doing direct forearm training, so let's say 20 sets per week, will he gain significant muscle in his forearms? Now keep in mind, he will be in a net caloric deficit the entire time. And I'll actually just put this question up here in the cards so I can have an idea of what you guys think. So I think that the answer is yes, unless he's some kind of non-responder to training or is just really under-eating protein. I think there's no good reason to think that he won't add muscular size to his forearms while losing weight overall. And this is something I feel like a lot of people in our community get wrong. It's really common for me to hear people say that you just can't build muscle unless you're in a caloric surplus. But as we'll see, this just really isn't true. And like most things, is totally context dependent. So I think the first thing we need to consider here is the first law of thermodynamics, which in this context says that if you're in a caloric surplus, then by definition, you'll be storing net energy. And if you're in a caloric deficit, you'll be losing net energy, with net being the key word there. But I think the confusion comes when people just assume that an anabolic process, like building muscle, couldn't happen concurrently with a catabolic process like losing fat, which it can. There are a few ways that we could explain why this is the case. The first is the common sense approach. So because fat tissue and muscle tissue are separate systems, it's perfectly possible to lose a bunch of fat due to the caloric deficit while still building muscle from the progressive training stimulus and sufficient protein. It would be like if you had two different bank accounts. You could withdraw $1,000 from one account while depositing $50 into the other account, and you still would have withdrawn a net amount of $950 despite monetary gain in one of the accounts. Now, another way to think about this is by using the actual math. So 1 kilogram, or about 2.2 pounds of muscle, contains 1,800 calories, while 1 kilogram of fat has 9,400 calories. Because muscle is mostly made up of water, it has much less stored energy than fat does. So let's just imagine someone gained 2 kilograms, so about 4.4 pounds of muscle, across a 6-month training program while losing 1 kilogram of fat. Something totally reasonable for someone in their first couple years of intelligent training. Now, if we do out the math here, so they gained 2 kilograms of muscle, which equals a gain of 3,600 calories, and then they lost 1 kilogram of fat, which equals a loss of 9,400 calories. So even though they would have gained 1 kilogram of total body weight, there must have been a total net energy deficit of 5,800 calories across those 6 months. Now, keep in mind that this is net total deficit. So because there's about 180 days in 6 months, this would only come out to about a 32 calorie deficit per day. And remember that this is despite the fact that over 4 pounds of muscle was gained. So the third way we can prove this is possible is by looking at actual training research results. So just picking one 2016 study out of Stu Phillips' lab, you can see that on average, subjects lost about 5 kilograms of fat mass while gaining about a kilogram of lean mass. And this was despite being in a caloric deficit and due to the fact that they were on a progressive resistance training program and eating a high protein diet. Now, not everyone can expect amazing body recomposition like this, and as I outlined in my Science Explained video last year on this, the likelihood of any given individual actually building muscle in a caloric deficit depends on several factors. So first, the less training experience you have, the easier it'll be to build muscle in a deficit. Now, the higher your starting body fat percentage, the easier it'll be because the stored fat can serve as a massive energy source throughout the deficit. The smaller the deficit, the easier it will be. In general, I recommend keeping the deficit below 20% of maintenance. And the higher your protein intake, the easier it'll be up to a point, which is probably somewhere around 1 gram per pound of body weight. You'll just want to keep those 4 factors in mind if you want to make it a reality for you. But I actually found the opposite question more interesting. So is it possible to eat in a caloric surplus and still lose body fat? So let's just look at the math here again. So if you were to gain 6 kilograms of muscle, which is definitely possible over a year as a beginner or an early intermediate, while at the same time losing a kilogram of fat, then by definition, you would have had to have been in a net surplus of 1,400 calories while losing body fat. Now, it's important to note that, again, that's total cumulative caloric surplus. So if the transformation happened over a year or 365 days, that'd actually only be about a 4-calorie surplus per day, which is obviously not practical at all. But I think what this ultimately proves is that it is possible to lose fat while in a caloric surplus if you build a lot of muscle very quickly because of the differences in energy densities between fat and muscle. At risk of just confusing things more, I wanted to use these two examples to prove the broader point that body recomposition certainly is very possible and actually expected under certain circumstances, and energy balance and body weight changes aren't always inextricably linked because of differences in the energy density of different body tissues. I would say people in their first 1 to 2 years of training can expect to build muscle and lose fat at the same time, as long as their training program is set up properly, they're eating sufficient protein, and the caloric deficit isn't too large. In practice, I'd recommend about a 15 to 20% deficit, and in general, you just want to focus on compound movements in the 6 to 15 rep range with progressive strength increases from week to week or month to month. Now, for people beyond their first couple years of training, despite the fact that some data does suggest that body recomposition is still possible in more experienced trainees, I still generally recommend discrete cutting and bulking cycles, because after a certain training age, trying to build muscle while in a caloric deficit will most likely result in either very quickly diminishing returns, meaning slower gains, or as you get even more advanced, you could just be totally spinning your wheels and not really getting much of anywhere with either goal. Before we leave, I'm just gonna pose the first scenario again. So we've got the same guy in a same 20% caloric deficit, but this time he has been training his forearms with 20 sets per week for the last 5 years leading into his cut. Now, throughout his cut, will he continue to build muscle in his forearms, or will he at best maintain that muscle? And I'll just put that one up there in the cards as well. And I'm just gonna leave it at that, and we can discuss that one in the comments if you'd like. So a lot of the information in this video came from James Krieger's research review, Weightology, which I strongly recommend subscribing to if you haven't already. So I'll have a link for that down below. And before we go, I wanna give a huge thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Skillshare is an online learning community with over 22,000 classes in videography, productivity, photography, and really anything that's gonna be useful.
Really long ad at the end of this one. So, so yeah, I love that one because it also goes to show you, like, you know, as you put on muscle mass, that muscle burns extra calories. So in the end of your journey, like, you actually end up losing more fat mass over the long run, which is summarized. You know, he made a whole video that could be summarized in a few seconds, but like, I love that. Like, you can see literally the mathematics behind it. So there we are. That's kind of like how that's one of the reasons why we want to kind of get good at mapping this stuff out for our clients. It will help you as you're working with clients with their diet to help them understand maybe like why we are doing our calories the way we are, and maybe why they haven't had success in the past. There are also a lot of like causes to things that make it very difficult to stick on a diet. And that's another part of this conversation as well. Why do people struggle dieting? Well, a lot of it, you know, can be genetics. There is definitely a certain genetic factor at play with people. Certain individuals have a predisposition for storing body fat easier than others, you know. People like that is oftentimes where I do look into alternative diets where, yeah, maybe we do focus a little bit more on things that target fat instead of like targeting carbohydrates or intensity, you know. It can be hunger. Your appetite has a big role to play. You know, if your diet that you're giving your client is really hard to stick to, they're not going to be able to adhere to it. You know, not everybody has you know, an unlimited amount of willpower. So hunger, you know, is a big deal. Now, your satiety is what you are sort of working with when it comes to like getting somebody to stay on their diet. Satiety is sensations that determine your level of hunger, right? So it determines how long you can wait before eating. If you're satisfied, if you're satiated, you don't need to eat, you know? So we're trying to come up with some ways to increase those satiety levels, right? This is often controlled by two major hormones, your leptin and your ghrelin. Leptin is a protein that signals that your body has sufficient energy stores, and ghrelin is the one that says, hey, I'm really hungry right now. So there are ways to produce leptin. Your body will actually make leptin if food looks more appetizing. So if you make your plates actually look in such a way that like you are stoked and you want to eat them, that's actually a good strategy for feeling fuller longer. It's one of the reasons why like learning how to like, you know, kind of dress a plate and make it look a little nicer is a big deal, surprisingly. Healthy snacks is a really good one. Like snacks are going to leave you producing satisfaction hormones that you enjoy. Eating off of a plate is a really big one, guys. The more they've actually seen where people, if you watch food disappear, if you actually see food disappear, it actually helps you produce more leptin, which is really weird, but it's one of the reasons why if you're going to have potato chips, take them out, put them into a bowl, put them onto a plate, and eat them from rather than out of the bag. That small change actually makes a very large difference because it makes you more likely to produce hormones that make you feel full because your brain is noticing that you're actually like reducing the amount of something. You're actually eating it. So that's a really big one. Other hormones as well, your hormones that are, stress hormones put you into a place where your body is more likely to store fat, right? Because you got to remember your body is trying to maintain homeostasis. So fat doesn't burn that many calories. If your body goes, all right, well, we're in a bad place, maybe we're in a place where we're not getting enough calories, right? We're not in a place where we're getting enough like nutrients. I should go into storage mode, right? It always is preparing for being on a deserted island, right? So your body, if it's getting too much stress, will actually produce these, hormones that don't help you build muscle and help you build fat. Things like cortisol, for instance. Cortisol is a really good hormone until we make too much of it. But that's a big part of it there. And then we've also got our environment. The environment that you are surrounding yourself with very much determines, your success or failure when it comes to being on like a diet. It's one of the reasons why I tell people if you want to have ice cream in your life, that's actually okay. There is room for things like ice cream. There's room in your life for even fast food, but learning how to overcome that convenience and burn a little bit of extra energy by doing chores manually or at least getting physically active throughout the day, and then not bringing unhealthy foods into your house are very important aspects of controlling your environment. If you want ice cream, then go on a date and go for a walk and get some ice cream, but don't bring it into your house. Then it becomes very unconscious. So sugary beverages is a big deal. The weight loss industry also leads to, misinformation, which is one of the reasons why people struggle with their weight. It is economic factors. There's a huge idea that healthy food is more expensive, and it is in some capacities. If you get it prepared, Whole Foods is obviously the most expensive freaking grocery store in the world. That's just because they are and they can get away with it. But it's not that expensive to buy fruits and vegetables. You just have to make them yourself, and I do know that that is expensive. Time is very much money. But that is another one of the things that we are trying to get our clients to learn how to overcome, and those types of inconveniences, right? Learning how to cook from home a little bit more frequently, learning how to buy natural ingredients and assemble them, man, yesterday we tried a new recipe for butternut squash, and it was awesome. And I was like, this is great. So, I'm definitely gonna be buying some more butternut squash lately because it was delicious and practically nothing on the calories. So obesity is driven by a lot of factors, guys. Hopefully we saw some of it as math, some of it is habits today. But when it comes down to controlling your weight status and meeting your weight loss or weight gain goals, it's going to come down to a combination of how well can you, get your client to actually adopt these math habits. You know what I mean? How do we actually, you can run the numbers all day, but if you can't get your client to do it, it's not going to be very effective. And that is about it, guys. Any questions today? Anything before I let you guys go?
Not for me. I think I learned a lot.
Thank you for your time, Brad.
Of course.